Good evening, everyone. My name's Fiona Lowe, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's Library Online Author event. Thanks for coming along. The Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges the Wadawurrung and the Eastern Maar original owners of the lands on which our library services operate, and we pay our respects to the Wadawurrung and the Eastern Maar elders past and present and emerging. And we acknowledge and celebrate the First Nations people of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. So before we start, we've just got a few housekeeping reminders. We'd love you to participate in this live webinar by clicking on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and typing any questions or comments. You may need to touch your screen to see the Q&A and the chat functions if you're using an iPad or an iPhone there at the bottom. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and if you'd like to watch the discussion again or recommend it to friends and families, it will be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel within the next couple of days. So in these COVID-19 times, I have to introduce myself, which seems a little strange, but anyway, I'm Fiona Lowe and I'm an award-winning author of more than 35 novels, ranging from short medical romances through to my more recent big and meaty women's fiction. And my latest release is Just an Ordinary Family. And when I'm not writing novels, I'm a distracted wife, a mother to 2 young adult sons, a guardian of 80 rose bushes and a slave to a cat. And I'm really thrilled to be here tonight, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce one of Australia's favourite authors, Belinda Alexandra. Belinda's the author of 9 best-selling novels, including Southern Ruby, which my entire family enjoyed on audio on a road trip across America. Belinda's got many talents, and she's passionate about animal welfare and is the patron of the World League for the Protection of Animals of Australia. So tonight we're going to be exploring Belinda's writing and her latest release, her new novel, The Mystery Woman. So welcome, Belinda.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and hello everyone. It's so good to be speaking to everyone tonight.
We've actually got someone that's tuned in from Spain. So but welcome to everyone. Oh my goodness. The cover of this novel is just divine, and we'll talk a little more about the cover later and definitely what is inside the pages. But my read of The Mystery Woman was hard and fast over the weekend, not because I was new, but also by the midpoint I was completely hooked. And I just, it's part mystery, it's past social commentary and part history, and I raced through the second half of the book just really keen to see how it would all play out. And as I said before, I'm familiar with your previous books, which I think you describe as generational sagas, but The Mystery Woman's at a bit of a change of direction with you, and how so and why the change?
Yeah, it is definitely a change of direction for me. I think there comes a time in every author's life where that, other book is itching to come out. And I had written 8 big historical generational sagas, and they were basically influenced from White Gardenia, my first book, my mother's own family history of her family going from China to Australia. But she actually influenced me in this next sort of genre in a way too, because when I was a child, we used to sit together and watch those classic Hollywood 1950s black and white dramas. So Strange on a Train, Laura, The Women, all of those movies. And I think they really just stayed in my psyche as, a wonderful sort of classic, elegant mystery. And that's sort of what I always wanted to write. And so I just felt ready to do something different, and I felt ready to write something with more psychologically complex characters. And so with this book, it really is quite different. I was studying film and television writing when I wrote it, and I really plotted it out like a film, which is why people are telling me that they're reading it in 24 or 48 hours, because they really can't stop because of the way I've structured it. And I'm getting a lot of feedback that people feel like it feels like a classic black and white noir film, which is exactly the effect I was going for.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, well, I definitely, as I said, and it's like, oh, you know, I've got my opinions, I've got my thoughts. I want to see whether I'm completely right or utterly off track. So Rebecca comes to Shipwreck Bay, and we'll delve a little more into why a bit later. But first of all, I just wanted to talk about the town. And it's described as, on the first page, when Rebecca is on the train, she comes out of the tunnel, and it says, mountains verdant with lily-pilly, wild cherry and cabbage palms shadowed the town, which was tucked into the elbow of the bay like a babe in the crook of a mother's arm. Well, it sounds absolutely idyllic, Belinda. And, you know, everyone knows everyone in small towns, and they are like that, but looks deceiving in Shipwreck Bay.
Yes, look, that's exactly the theme that I'm going for. You know, as well as being that sort of classic mystery, I was really going for an Australian gothic atmosphere. And so suspense and, you know, a sense of foreboding is very important in the gothic. But for me, you know, a castle that looks haunted is not as scary to me as a place that looks beautiful, normal and respectable, but has a dark undercurrent. That's actually much more frightening to me. And so that's sort of the atmosphere that I wanted to create. The South Coast is beautiful, it's rugged, but in this tiny little town, you know, there are a few monsters lurking.
And did you have a particular geographical area that in your head, when you made your fictitious town? I always create a fictitious town in a real area. So where did you do that?
Yeah. Yes, this is on the New South Wales South Coast, and we used to spend a lot of time there when I was a child, and it's a beautiful place to visit. So I was probably around Kiama and Gerringong, that area, yep. But one thing that I would have to say, and I need to do this now, is to apologise to everybody on the New South Wales South Coast and everyone that lives in a small town, that this in no way represents what I think of the New South Wales South Coast or what I think of small towns, which have always been welcoming to me. I just needed to create a really claustrophobic kind of atmosphere. And I have never lived in a small town, and yet people who have lived in a small town said they felt it was authentic. And the reason for that is I think we've all lived in a kind of small town, whether it's an office. And when a small town, I don't actually mean a small town, maybe a small town mentality of people who are gossipy, who are maybe insular in their thinking. And I've experienced that in toxic, you know, work environments in an office. Other people may have experienced that in a dysfunctional family. So it's not. Sorry, what was that, Fiona?
Mothers groups.
Mothers groups. Look, there can be tennis clubs. You know, we can go on with anything. You know, that sort of toxic, closed-in environment was what I was trying to create. And the reason why I created a remote place geographically was that seemed to enhance that feeling of being far away from everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it was wonderful, and I could, I definitely picture myself. Now, you mentioned before, but we might go into a bit more detail. It's the Mystery Woman is described as a modern Gothic, and the Bronte sisters are, you know, such as Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights, are famous for the Gothic. And I remember being dragged along to amateur theatre to see Gaslight, I think. And I'm taking a punt that our protagonist is Rebecca, because perhaps that's a nod to Daphne du Maurier's Rebecca. Is that so?
Yeah, you're spot on there, Fiona. Daphne du Maurier's writing is something that I've loved for years, and her sense of atmosphere that she creates. The Rebecca in my story is not the Rebecca of Daphne du Maurier's story, but it was just a little way of saying I pay my respect to the great writers that have gone before me, especially ones that have influenced me, great women writers who've created suspense and atmosphere. So it was really a way of starting the story of saying, you know, I really love to capture that, but in an Australian setting. And I really wanted, you know, you mentioned the midpoint, and of course the midpoint in Rebecca, Daphne du Maurier's novel is extremely important, because you think the novel's going this way and then suddenly everything turns on its head. And I've really loved that twist, that here I am, I'm taking you on a little atmospheric town, I'm taking you on a little romantic journey, and now, you know, yeah, boom. And
can you tell us what you consider are the elements of a Gothic novel, in case people aren't aware?
Yes, look, that's a good point, Fiona, because a lot of the time when people hear Gothic, they think of the people hanging around Melbourne Cemetery with, you know, dark eyeliner and black clothes, or vampire novels. Vampire novels and Victorian novels, you know, can be a branch of Gothic. But when we're talking about Gothic, we're usually talking about a branch of a genre of fiction that really is centered around suspense, atmosphere, a sense of foreboding. There's usually a damsel in distress, and there's usually a troubled male protagonist, and there's a monster or a beast within. So, you know, all those things are the elements that come into play. But what I wanted to do with this novel is I wanted to modernize it and maybe even take a slight feminist stance on it. So the damsel in distress is actually not the helpless damsel in distress that's fainting all the time. She's quite active in her role, but at the same time, there's also the element that I love when people describe Gothic fiction, and that's pleasurable terror. So, so that's what I tried to create, an atmosphere, like it's a beautiful environment. The description of the ocean is beautiful and inviting, but there's a kind of terror that's always pulling at your toes or making your skin prickle. And I think that's the kind of novel that gives me a lot of pleasure, rather than something that's, you know, blood and guts, something that makes me feel more afraid of what could be real and what I can't see.
Oh, absolutely. I probably can deal with watching blood and guts, but I can't watch Hitchcock's Rear Window without getting chest pain and pulling the suspense will just do me in. So let's talk about Rebecca, because she is our protagonist or our heroine. And I'm just going to read just a tiny bit from the blurb, just the first paragraph. She had thought Shipwreck Bay was simply a remote town where people were bored senseless with their little lives, and now she saw that its virtuous facade hid something darker and more sinister. So tell us about Rebecca Wood.
Okay, Rebecca Wood is fleeing to Shipwreck Bay because she's leaving a scandal in Sydney. She's had an affair with a high-profile politician, and she needs to get away from the press. And she thinks she's basically going to this little sanctuary. Now, she's a woman in the 1950s, and so she's had a lot of indoctrination about her role in society and women's role in society. But I think she has a real spirit in her that she wants to live boldly and richly and with a bit of adventure. But she really doesn't have any role models of that around her. So she's constantly fighting her own indoctrination, which of course in the 1950s was, for women, it's better to be married and unhappy than to be single and independent and happy. And so she's constantly fighting that. And as the postmistress of the town, she has quite an important role. And she really does take that role quite seriously as a representative of the Postmaster General. And it's a way of her carving, I guess, a little part of, influence in her life, a little bit of power. But in the end, she finds that that role is quite a scary one to have.
That's right. And back in the 50s, and you've answered the question I was going to ask next, which is fine, but women were generally nurses, teachers, secretaries until they married, and then they had to give up their job. And you settled on the postmistress because she did actually wield a little bit of power in the town. You know, she's responsible for the telegrams and, making sure the post arrived and banking and all sorts of things. So, that was a job where she would have a bit of respect from the town. And let's face it, the town she went to, she was going to be hard work getting respect. But back in the day, before television and the internet, you know, gossip was the electricity that fueled a small town, because, you know, it was the entertainment. And a newcomer existed to be scrutinised. And Rebecca says in the book, gossip can kill a woman. And as you said before, she'd arrived in Shipwreck Bay, hiding from the breakup of a long-time affair with a federal politician. And she's certainly questioning her choices, but it seems that men are almost fated for having a mistress, but the mistress is deemed disposable by the lover and completely evil by society. So can you talk to the double standards, and do you think much has changed since the 1950s?
Yeah, look, Rebecca was a really interesting character for me to write. I wanted to create, I think in my past books, my heroines they weren't perfect, but they were certainly squeaky clean compared to Rebecca. And I really wanted to write a woman with a past. And when I was thinking about her and thinking about her character, I really felt that I was taking a risk with having a woman that had been the other woman, because the archetype of that is disliked by most women. And, you know, understandably, because a lot of heartbreak comes from cheating husbands. And also the threat to the family and the threat to a lifestyle. It is a real fear, and I really understood that. But somehow it seemed the right way to convey a woman who was really trapped in a world that was run by men. And what has actually surprised me, and, you know, readers constantly surprise me, which is always wonderful, is that the readers have really embraced Rebecca as a character rather than shunned her and disliked her. And that was interesting for me. But I sort of really did want to show just how hounded she was by the press and just what the double standard was. Like, he sort of goes on to ever greater heights in his career, where she's considered a fallen and ruined woman who basically has to run away from the city she loves to hide away in a small town. And I think there's certainly that double standard in the 1950s, because you also bring religion into it as well. And that she was the temptress, and she was the one that was full of sin. And, you know, we forget what an important role religion played in people's lives in the 1950s. So there would have been that as well. But I think what's interesting is I don't think we've changed that much. I really do think women who fall, and not even for something as extreme as that, people who do the wrong thing, women who do the wrong thing on television, have a slight slip on television, you'll never see them on television again. And yet men who do the most scandalous, disgusting things, you know, get their own TV shows. Yeah. So I think that double standard is, you know, if a woman falls, the punishment is brutal. If a man falls, and I'm not necessarily talking about affairs here, I'm talking about any sort of mistake or thing that's said, it's sort of like, you know, people might, you know, not watch his show for 2 days, but then he's back, he's forgiven it. It's a very strange thing, and I think writers always want us to question ourselves, and I think we have to ask ourselves, why is that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I was nodding all the way through, going, well, it's kind of changed, but it hasn't really, in lots of different things. And we'll chat about that a bit later. We'll just maybe get on. Oh, no, I've still got a kind of a hard question here before we get on to the more fun stuff. So in the book, it's said a few times, men are the predators and we are the prey. And Rebecca says that, meaning we mean women. And the women in this town have all suffered at the hands of men in some shape or form. And Rebecca's predecessor, the postmistress, actually committed suicide. And I was struck over and over how in many ways little has changed again for women trapped in relationships with men. And so what made you want to explore these issues in your novel?
Well, I think it's a huge issue at the moment. We're talking about domestic violence. And I think what's interesting about history for me is I find with my books there's two reactions to history mainly. And the first one is oh, thank God we're not like that anymore. Thank God we've changed. And the other one is nothing has changed at all. We're exactly the same. And I think history is usually somewhere actually in between. I think as human beings, we do progress and learn, but then we are human beings and we always sort of make similar mistakes. So we might talk about that in relation to whaling later on.
Later on, yeah.
If you remind me. But I think with domestic violence, what I really think is a problem that we have there that we're still struggling with today is stereotypes. Back in the 1950s, women were very dependent on men for their living. As you said, you know, they didn't have many career paths. So basically men were their survival, line. And so women were in domestic violence situations were usually advised, even in writing, and it was meant to be good advice, but it was terrible advice, was, if your husband is abusive, make him a nice dinner. Don't talk too much when he comes home. Bathe the kids and put the children to bed early so they don't irritate him. And all these things around don't, appease the abuser. And in that way, society was really colluding with the abuser by making the woman think she had some control. She could control the abuse by changing her behaviour. And I think where that's transferred over, even though we understand so much more about domestic violence, and women's roles have changed. Women can have jobs, they can have their own income, but we seem to be forever battling with domestic violence. And I've done a lot of research on this and I've done a lot of thinking about this, and this is the reason why I think we're not making the progress that we should. I think it's because those of us who are not disordered in our thinking cannot understand domestic violence. We cannot understand why someone would abuse somebody who loves and trusts them. Why would they abuse the mother or father of their children? Why would they destroy their whole family? And we can't understand it, so we try to understand it from our point of view. And our point of view is, if I was going to abuse someone, I must be mentally ill, or I must have been driven to the point of craziness. And so we're sort of interpreting people who abuse from that point of view. And then we're looking at the people who are stuck in these kind of environments, and we're saying, well, if I was stuck in that environment, it would have to be because I didn't have money or I didn't speak English and I couldn't get out of it. And what's happening is we, even with our good intentions, are stereotyping abusers and those who are abused in a way that's not helpful. And what I really hope I can show in my book, and what I really wanted to do, was to break some stereotypes. And the first one is that men who abuse are out of control. And I really wanted to look at the psychological aspect of domestic abuse, which we're talking a lot more about, thank goodness. And that there is a lot of intention. And a lot of that abuse begins in a predatory way right from the first meeting between a man and a woman. And I also wanted to show that this stereotype of women who are abused is not because they're not assertive or because they don't have their own income. They're actually abused because they're women. That's the only real factor. It doesn't matter if you were abused in your childhood. It really doesn't matter if you were codependent and all these other things we've tried to come up with why women are abused and they can't get out of the relationship. So I think if I could offer anything to us, all the people who are bamboozled by the idea of domestic abuse, it's really come to understand the psychological techniques that abusers use and understand that it's deliberate. It's a very disordered way of thinking. It's not our way of thinking, it's a disordered way of thinking. And if we can learn those psychological traps, we'll be able to protect ourselves, we'll be able to protect our children, we'll be able to protect our friends, and we'll understand what's happening to our friends when they're in those sort of situations.
No, I thought you dealt with it really well in the book, and definitely gives people who have never perhaps come across it and been a bit more sheltered something to think about. So moving on to something a little more fun. Rosalie Ham's Gothic novel and recent film The Dressmaker managed to combine love, hate and haute couture. And Alexandra Joel had another Harper colleague, had a recent success with The Paris Model. And our Rebecca here, our gorgeous Rebecca, is smart, intelligent, and as one of the characters in the book says, overdressed for every occasion. So tell us about how you dressed all your characters, and what do you think it is about 1950s couture that we love? And for everyone, just look at that frock and those and that.
I think, firstly, for me, when I'm doing my characters, I really think about everything about them. I really think about the kind of house that they would live in. I give them big backstories. So I really think about if they were a child, what kind of pet they would have had, or maybe they didn't have a pet. Because I think all of those tells us something about our character. And I think our dress does tell us a lot about the character, how they present themselves to the world. And of course, in the 1950s, people were dressing up to go to the supermarket or to the movies. My family background is Russian. I'm used to Russian women going jogging in high heels. So, you know, I get the 1950s quite well. And I think what it did and how I wanted to use clothing is, while the clothing is very beautiful and people are presented very well, it's hiding quite a bit too, this outward appearance of being presentable. And of course, 1950s clothes, why they suit women and men so well is they're beautifully structured. So they make the body look beautiful. But what we often don't think about, and I had to think about when I was writing Rebecca, particularly when she was being very active, if she was on a bicycle or something like that, was under those beautiful gowns was a hell of a lot of very tight underwear.
Yeah.
You know, bras that were extremely tight, panties that were high, and, you know, even young women wore girdles because that was really the only way to hold up your pantyhose. And you know, so you got a girdle. It was difficult for women to walk, let alone run. And I remember my godmother, who was always beautifully dressed, told me in the 1950s that the best part of the day was taking all that stuff off. And so for me, the clothes, they're beautiful. You know, they show an elegance and a structure, but what's underneath is very uncomfortable. And I think that sort of suited the theme of everything looking fine on the surface, but not being quite so fine underneath.
That's right. Did you have one particular frock of Rebecca's that was your favourite?
I think I was really that child that always had the dolls that were being dressed up. In fact, my childhood cat was always dressed up. So it's definitely something that I enjoy doing. But I think the frock that I like the most is the one she describes as her suit of armour, her green dress. Yeah, because when she wears it, and I guess we still talk about power dressing, don't we? That sometimes, you know, a good dress can make you feel that I'm ready to take on the world.
Absolutely.
As the Italians say, fare una bella figura, you know, like always put on a good outfit, even if you feel like crap.
That's right, exactly right. I think it does give you a boost, especially as we're home in
yes, exactly.
You know, I slapped on the makeup tonight and I look quite presentable, but shh, I've still got my pajama pants. I look good. So we're talking about the suit of armour, the beautiful green dress. There's a line in the book where Rebecca said, Rebecca knew that when it came to women, it was better to confide something rather than nothing at all. And this really spoke to me. So I want to know, why do you think this is? What is it about women that rings so true?
Yeah, look, I think there's an interesting thing there that I think that it's become almost a female culture that we bare our wounds to other women that we barely know. I mean, sort of sometimes at book signings, I'm privy to things that I'm completely unexpected. But when I was at university, I used to work at David Jones in the city on the cosmetics counter. And I really think that was the equivalent of being the friendly barman. You know, and the women would come up to the, you know, counter, and as I'm, you know, applying makeup to them, they're telling me about their divorces and their deepest hurts and things that have happened. And I think we sometimes bond that way. But I personally don't think it's healthy. I think that we definitely need to have our friends that we trust and we confide in. But I don't think this female bare all to women when we barely know them is healthy for us. There's a couple of reasons for that. I think we start to leave pieces of ourselves all over the place. And I think we might regret that later. But also, just as men can be predators and manipulators, women can be predators and manipulators. And you certainly don't want to be giving your deepest dark secrets to a narcissist, out there. Right. So I do think if it's something that I'm mindful of, is definitely, I think you do need to be able to talk about your heartfelt experiences, but I think you need to have discernment in who you speak to. And Rebecca actually does have that. She speaks to no one.
And she has, there are moments where not necessarily with Rebecca, but with the other people in the town, and she gets tiny wee snapshots of people's lives that makes her rethink her decision about people. And we do that all the time. We think we've got someone pegged, and then it's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I could smell the salt and hear the waves in Shipwreck Bay, and just like any town, small town that's dependent on a natural resource, they really don't take too kindly to conservationists. I was a young person in Tasmania back in the early 80s, so I remember all that. So there's a very strong conservation theme in The Mystery Woman, and the economy of this town is whaling, which was active in Australia from white settlement, until about in the 70s. So can you tell us why you chose to incorporate whaling in the book and the research that you did?
Yeah. Because I think a lot of us don't know that Australia actually even had a whaling industry. That's a surprise to a lot of people. But I wanted to really give the town a background of cruelty. So although whaling is not the main theme of the book, it's always there in the background. And it sort of reflects the thoughtlessness, the carelessness of the people in the town, that we have, this beautiful ocean, these beautiful creatures, but they had no heart for them whatsoever. I mean, whaling is still horrific, and it was horrific then. Basically, grenades are shot into the whale to blow it up from the insides. It's a totally inhumane death for anything. Yeah.
I'm old enough to have been a young teenager with a Save the Whale badge.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I remember being taken as a child to Eden and to the whaling, which is on the New South Wales coast, to the whaling museum there. So where did you do your research? How did you visit any places, museums? Or?
Yes, look, I've been to Eden, and also, again, I'm going to apologise to the people of Eden. I actually do it in my author's note in the book, because really on the south coast, the southern coast of New South Wales, that really was the only whaling town. So I did think that people were saying, oh, that's Eden, but I really don't want to insult any of the inhabitants of that lovely place. So I made a fictional town. So I had that there, but I think, what I was actually talking about earlier about history, and how sometimes we look at history and we say, thank goodness we don't have that cruel industry anymore. And then there'll be other people that'll say, we really haven't changed. And I think the job of a book is more than just to entertain. It's good to get us thinking. And one of the things that I was saying earlier is about human beings, is that we can look at ourselves in the past and say, oh, wasn't that dreadful? But we often can't see ourselves in the present. And so I really like history for us to examine, how are we different to the past, but how are we exactly the same? And so I hope that the cruelty of whaling, which a lot of people just can't fathom now, will have people thinking, well, what are we doing to animals now? Or what are we doing to nature now that's so ingrained in our culture that we don't even notice it? And all the same arguments people would have used in the 1950s to continue whaling, like it's traditional, it's manly, it's what we've always done. Britain is doing it, everyone else is doing it, we'll miss out if we don't do it. It's important to our economy and so on. Are all the same arguments we use for quite horrific animal abuse now.
Oh, that's right. And I mean, the Japanese are still whaling, so
yeah.
Yeah. That's right. But and small, this is and it is a constant thing today. There's still an issue in small towns that are dependent on natural resources, and we need to think outside the box to new ways of the economy. So I may have said once or twice how much I just love your cover. So can you tell us a little bit about your cover process? Did you send off any ideas, or is this, tell us how it works.
Okay, this one was where I closed my eyes and HarperCollins did their magic, and then they emailed me the cover. I have a very good relationship with HarperCollins. I've been with them since my first book, so, you know, a 20-year relationship. They've got an awesome design team. I know a lot of authors have a lot of issues with covers and backwards and going backwards and forwards, but I think I've got a good relationship with the publisher, so I could talk about the concepts and they could have a look at the book and really just sort of come together. And I think even the typeface is perfect for, you know, for this typeface. I think mine comes out reverse. I think yours is yours is a better one. But even the typeface has that classic, you know, mystery, that elegant sort of mystery about it. So I think that they've captured all the elements just perfectly there. So basically, my process was to click on my email and go, oh wow, that's, you know, amazing.
Yeah. No, it is beautiful the way she's walking toward the waves. We can't see her face.
Yeah.
She's got the small suitcase, which is actually described in the part of the book. So well done, the design team, because often we get things on the cover that aren't quite right.
Yes.
Perfect match. And yeah, I've just finished watching the television series, The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, which is all 1950s fashion. So had I not known who you were or ever read any of your books, or I would have been really tempted just to buy this purely enough for the.
Yeah, it certainly is a beautiful cover. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And you know, when people say you can't judge a book by its cover, you can judge this book by its cover, because it is conveying exactly what it is. Yeah.
You're right. Well, we've got some questions coming through, so I might default to our wonderful audience on this, because I've probably been chatting long enough. So Charlotte Stanhope writes, what advice do you have for aspiring writers in terms of writing routines and process and trying to get published?
Yeah, well, all of that, I think in terms of routine, what I think, you know, sometimes we think, I've said this before, that when we're thinking about starting our first novel, we often think, oh, I'll do that when I've got time. And aspiring writers are probably working in another job. They're not doing it full time. And so I think a better way than thinking about time and time management is to actually think about passion. Like, why are you passionate about telling this story? And I really do think that if you're passionate about the story that you're telling, somehow you do find the time and somehow you do find the discipline. It doesn't matter if World War II is going off, you know, in the background and somebody's vacuuming and all this other stuff and kids are running around. When you're passionate, somehow you go into the zone and you can write the story. So my tip for staying in contact with your passion is to always have a notebook around you with this book, with this story. And so even if you're sitting on the train or you're waiting in line for something, just maybe plan out the next chapter, or think about a character, think about how you might develop your character, or an image comes to you. Just always be connecting with the story every day. Sometimes when you're you know, you are working in something else and you're trying to write a book, you can sort of work on the weekend and then you're not working during the week, and then something gets busy, you've got doctor's appointments and all these things. You can lose connection with the story, and then you tend to lose your passion. So you've got to think of your story like your spouse or your animal. You want to keep connection with it. So if you keep connection, keep the passion, everything regarding the discipline and finding the time and everything and being able to concentrate, that will work out.
I always say that if you don't make it a priority in your life, no one else in your life will make it a priority either.
And it goes like a loop. The more that you connect with the story, the more connected you feel with the story, the more you connect with the story. So even if it feels a little bit shaky at first, just keep going, keep connecting to it. It's really like anything, you know, if you're dancing, if you're doing any other skill, at first it kind of can feel very awkward to create that habit or to keep that passion up. But once you get a bit of momentum, you keep going. So I guess my advice is don't lose that momentum. Even if you've had a very busy day, just spend 5 minutes thinking about the next scene in the story or thinking about one of your characters. Just stay connected to the story whatever way you can. Look up frocks, decide what that character's going to be wearing in the next scene.
There goes 3 hours. No, that's great advice. So Happy Valley Books, which is Craig and Phil, and they actually review books and gave you a lovely review.
Yes.
And they've asked this question, did you have a picture of someone famous in mind when you were writing the role of Rebecca Wood? She has that fabulous 50s glamour and is a very memorable character. So
thanks. Yeah, thank you so much for that question. She really isn't modelled on anybody. She did just appear from my imagination, but I gave her a very long backstory. I really developed her, and of course there's little bits of why she is the way she is weaved through the story as well. But she was a great character to write because she does have, she's contradictory. And I think all of us are contradictory. Like we want to do something and we do the opposite. Today I wrote down some intentions that I had and I went and did exactly the opposite to them. And I think we're often in rebellion with each other, with ourselves. And she is that. And I think, you know, I was saying earlier, I was a bit worried about writing a woman who'd once been the other woman because I thought people were really going to dislike her and hold that against her. But I think the fact that she's so you know, toing a frame between her contradictions actually makes her a relatable character. And so even though she's probably not the most likable of the characters that I've written, you know, across the course of my history, people do connect with her. So maybe Rebecca is a little bit of all of us. That's where she's come from.
I also feel perhaps because it is set in the 50s and it's not now, having just written a book about a woman who does do something quite unforgivable that's polarized readers, I wonder if just also it's just that little bit further away from us in the 50s than it is right now in our life, because I write like in today. So that's interesting. But yeah, I think also she's a very well-rounded character, and you have her motivations are very clear. And if we understand why someone is doing something, even if we don't agree, but we can see the process of why, we're more understanding. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. So Virginia Martin says, hi Belinda, I love all your books. I'm currently listening to The Mystery Woman on audio, and I've just met Barut, the immigrant lady who brings money to the post office. Could you tell me a bit about her nationality?
Okay, well, she's Norwegian, and in Australia in the 1950s, after the Second World War, our whaling industry had sort of declined, and the Australian government wanted to boost it again. And so they did bring in Norwegian captains to sort of teach the Australians how to go about the industry. The Norwegians were whalers, like I guess, you know, how can I describe them? They were like the Germans of cars. The Norwegians were the ones that were known for being the best whalers, having you know, had such a long history of it, and that their methods, I mean, they were actually the ones that had developed the harpoon gun and all those other sort of awful technologies. No offense to my Norwegian friends, because I love them for so many other things, but not for whaling. And, you know, so that's really why she's in the town there. And that's why the Norwegians are sort of not quite accepted into this culture, this very Australian town. They are seen on the edge of society, although they're liked because they're bringing prosperity to the town. But that's a little bit why she's an outsider, because she's foreign, basically. Yeah.
And we certainly in the 1950s did not embrace.
No.
No, and I'm not going to give anything away, but when we were talking before about just this, you know, veneer of things looking normal, and then but the terror. There's one terrifying scene in there that with a harpoon gun. I was like, oh, I'm not sure I want to read that. So Beck Brown, who's Geelong reader, hi Beck. She says, Belinda, which era would you prefer to live in, now or the 1950s?
Oh, I think now wearing 1950s clothes, but with modern underwear. I think the clothes of the 1950s are beautiful. You know, with each of the books I write, I really like to imagine myself in that time period. I really spend a lot of time, like I do a lot of research, but I also spend a lot of time just closing my eyes and seeing myself in a 1950s kitchen, using a 1950s kettle, and really just imagining the scents, imagining what the food would have been like, which would have been awful for me because I'm a vegetarian. You know, all of that, I really like to imagine that, you know, and going out in the sunshine and your makeup's all melting because it was made of like all sorts of horrible things. And you know, I'm the person that goes to the book fairs and looks for the books from the 1950s, like How to Decorate Your Home. One of my favourites ones is Beauty Secrets from the 1950s, which advises women to hide their powder and their lipstick under their pillow. Newlywed women, so wake up before their husband does, do all their makeup and look glamorous before he opens his eyes. All those kind of things I like to imagine. But I'm very much a person that loves the present and really keeps myself excited about the present. So I enjoy learning from the past. I enjoy exploring the past, but I'm definitely not one of those people that you would find living in, you know, creating a 1950s life around me and sleeping in hair rollers and all those kind of things. So I actually quite respect people that do that, because I think they keep history alive for us. Yeah.
I actually saw a play at the start. The only live theatre I saw all year before we got shut down at Melbourne Theatre Company was about a woman, and their whole house was set in the 1950s, but outside those walls it was actually a 2020. It was a fabulous play.
Yeah.
And oh yeah, the furniture.
Yeah, thank God for the hipsters.
Yeah, that's right. It was great. So just a few messages before we have another couple of questions. Julia Gomez says, I probably have mangled that, but she's giving a big cheerio from Spain and says, hello, Belinda. And Jennifer Closter says, fascinating conversation, can't wait to read the book. And Charlotte, who you answered the question about getting started on a novel, said, thank you so much, wonderful advice. So we've got Donna Katz says, Australian women authors seem to have really hit their straps, particularly with historical fiction. Why do you think this is?
You know, that is interesting. It is sort of interesting that we have done that. I can't 100% explain why, except that women readers love historical fiction. And I think that there's a real connection there. I mean, male readers, I have lots of male readers too who love historical fiction. But for some reason, I think that we are very, very interested in exploring history. And female writers can really bring the life of a female character. I think they can bring that authenticity to life of a woman living in that period, because we can relate to that. So I think there's really something happening along that connection, that women have always loved history, but having female writers present female characters in history cements that connection even closer.
Yeah, that's great. Craig and Phil from Happy Valley Books want to know, how do you celebrate when you write the last word?
By the time I've written the last word, I need a lie down.
Tea and a lie down.
Or in the 1950s, as they would say, have a Bex.
Yeah.
It makes it a little better. But you know, there is that, I do feel that atmosphere of when you're in the cinema and, you know, the movie ends and the curtain comes down. I really do feel that sense of, oh, you know, that was really a journey. Oh, sorry, just going to drink water.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is a sense of triumph with that last word. By the time it comes to the editing process, though, and I've read the novel 200 times, it's more like, yeah, take the damn thing. I never want to see it again, you know. It becomes a little bit like relatives that have stayed a little bit too long. You love them, but yeah, it's time for them to move on.
So do you have any tradition at all at any step of the process? Like, you know, when's champagne involved?
Now, like when it was easy to get together with friends, dancing was always, going out dancing was the thing that I love to do to celebrate the end of a novel, or else get together with my, you know, group of girlfriends to celebrate it. But now it's like more like, my cats are called Valentino, Versace and Gucci. It's more like, hey guys, we did it. Okay. And I'll ring all my friends. So, but I can party on my own. I can do that. Yeah. So it's more fun with other people, but yeah, I can still do that on my own.
And let's face it, as authors, we're living with a cast of characters constantly.
Yes, we do. Yeah, exactly. You know, in fact, people ask me, do I find this a lonely profession? And you're saying, are you kidding? By the end of the day, after having all these characters to deal with, and some of them are awful, it's just, you know, no, I never feel lonely. Yeah, I've got a cast going with me wherever I go.
Someone who hasn't left their name has asked, how did you approach researching the 50s and being historically accurate?
Yeah, look, that's really important. I think it's very important to create that world true to not only the people that remember the 1950s, but to create it for people who never experienced it, myself, you know, included. And I think it's what I would call, like, we do, you know, I can do a lot of research, I can do a lot of reading, I tend to listen to the music, I tend to read the newspapers of the time so that I can really see what was occupying people's minds then. And I like looking at all the advertisements then, because I just think, you know, I think in the future people will be looking at our advertisements for things, and going, what were these nutcases, you know, thinking? And in the 1950s was this period of, you know, excitement about all the new gadgets and so on. And so I like reading the ads, I like watching the movies, I like reading books that were popular. I do all of that. But I think the thing that really brings a book alive is if you can find what I call the telling detail. And that's a detail that really evokes an emotion in your reader and can really capture something. So for me, it was like looking at recipes for the 1950s and realizing that people actually ate salad in jelly. Like the salad was there and it was in a jelly mold, and people actually ate this.
They still do that in the United States. Still do.
I didn't know that. I believe some people still do that in Russia as well. Yeah, so all that kind of stuff that really just stays in your mind. But also there's other little connections. I described one character as smelling like Lux soap. And I don't know anyone that still uses the soap flakes to, you know, wash their clothes. But I remember my grandmother did. And it had a very light sort of floral fragrance to it. So just picking those little telling details can bring a story to life.
Absolutely. We've got one more question, and then I'm going to ask. Well, actually, Deborah may well have asked my question, which is totally fine. What are you working on now, Belinda? When can we expect it? No pressure.
Okay, well, I'm actually working on another mystery, but because it's a mystery, I won't talk about it just yet. But it will be out. You know, I've forgotten what year it is. I should remember it's 2020, but it will be out in 2022. So,
but you've got something coming up, a completely different direction. So tell us about that project.
Yeah, because a lot of my readers say when they finish my book, they think, I don't want to have to wait all this time for your next book. Well, you don't this year. You only have to wait until November, because it's been a very exciting year for me, that I'm bringing out my first non-fiction book. And that's called The Divine Feline, a chic cat lady's guide to woman's best friend. And I know all my cat-loving readers are really going to enjoy that. I was approached by a publisher to write it, and it really did not feel like work to me. It felt like the book I was born to write. I write about the history of women and cats, why women and cats like each other so much. From ancient Egypt through the Middle Ages to the present day. I write my own memoirs of my life with cats. I have Pebbles, the agony uncle cat, who gives advice on cat behavioural problems. And there's magic spells you can do with your cats. And also lots of practical advice in there. So it is a beautiful gift book. It's content rich, you know, it's nice and solid. It's pretty heavy going, and it's got a velvet spine. So for those of you who like to stroke the spine, it's there as well. So it's got everything to delight cat ladies everywhere.
Oh, it sounds like the perfect thing for a stocking stuffer at Christmas. Yeah. Well, just before we wrap up, we've just got, Charlotte says she can't wait for the cat book. She's a fellow cat lover, 4 exclamation marks. And Wendy says it's good that you don't want to return to the 1950s, because you would need to be able to navigate a Vogue pattern and make your own dresses.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think I have covered everyone's questions, and we're just about out of time. So thank you so much for a wonderful discussion, Belinda. So now we just say that The Mystery Woman, published by HarperCollins, can be purchased online from HarperCollins or any of our excellent local bookstores that are offering online ordering. And Geelong, we are out of restrictions, so you can go to the bookstore. Very exciting. As from midnight tonight at 12:01, you can head out. Copies are also available to borrow from the Geelong Regional Library in ebook and audio and hard copy. The library's got 19 copies and there's 71 hold, so you might want to jump online as soon as we finish to add to the list. And if you're a member of the library, you can take advantage of the library's new Click and Deliver home delivery service, which you can access through the website. So thanks everyone for being here tonight. And Belinda, would you like to say a few words to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely. Firstly, I want to say thank you to all my lovely readers for joining us tonight. It's just such a pleasure to be able to talk to you. I can't see you. I'm used to seeing my audiences, but I do feel your presence and your beautiful energy and all your beautiful support. And I especially want to wish you all well. You know, stay happy, stay positive, and we'll come out the other side of this very strange event. But I just particularly want to wish you all the best, and I look forward to talking to you again, hopefully in the near future.
Yeah, and hopefully in person. So thanks again, and on behalf of the library, thank you everyone for spending your evening with us. Have a lovely rest of the evening and good night.